Hello everyone, this is so exciting. This is our very first live webinar on the web portal. We're doing this through YouTube, so there's going to be a few things that we need to figure out to make sure everyone can see this, but this is so exciting. My name's Justin Ashby. I work at the home office. A lot of the videos that you may see, whether it's on different marketing campaigns, on our YouTube channel, or just being a part of Precoa, I've been a big part of that, so this is so exciting to kind of branch into this new opportunity that we have to do these live webinars. So I am not the host for today's webinar. That's Eric Battles. He's a much better looking man than me, but we're so excited to have our Director of Field Development kind of host this webinar specifically on out-of-area protection. So that's enough for me. You may see me in and out here and there. I'm going to make sure that this live stream goes smoothly, and then we're also going to do some Q&As at the end where I'll come right back in. But without further ado, here is your Director of Field Development, Eric Battles. Eric?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Justin, for passing it over. We're excited to be with you this morning. We're excited to be able to spend some time talking about our out-of-area protection program. This has been a process for us over the last year and a half since we partnered with Masa and began offering this program. We really have spent a lot of time as we've slowly rolled it out across the country looking for best practices and trying to find the best way to create the best training to offer to each of you. We really feel like we've had some standout folks across the country, and that's why we're bringing this training to you today. Just as by way of a little bit of an agenda, we have our special guest and trainer today is Spencer Roylance. He's a regional manager for us in Minnesota. He'll be conducting the training today. After Spencer's training, we have a special opportunity to spend a little bit of time with Ben Wood, who's a counselor with us in Kansas City. He's going to share his experience with OAP over the last few months as he's adopted this training as well. And then at the end, after Ben shares his experience, we're going to have some time for question and answer. So you may be watching, if you're watching this webinar live on the web portal, at the bottom of the video screen, you have an opportunity to max out the screen, or there's a YouTube picture, or a small emblem of YouTube. If you click on that, then what happens is it takes you to the YouTube page. When you do that, then on this side of your screen will be a chat box. Throughout Spencer's training, if there are any questions about the presentation or about the process of the presentation, we want you to enter those questions in the chat box, and then Justin will be moderating a question and answer section later on. We'll make sure we get all those questions addressed live. We're excited to have Spencer here with us. I mentioned he's a regional manager for us in Minnesota. He's been with us for a number of years as a producer. He was a million-plus producer multiple years, and was one of the kind of pioneers of first testing out-of-area protection there in Minnesota. He's really discovered a lot of simple practices that can make this a really effective tool for each of you, and he's going to be sharing those with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the time over to Spencer. Thank you, Spencer, for your time today.
Hey, thank you, Eric. It's great to be here. You know, I always wanted to be a viral YouTube sensation. I think this is the closest I'm going to get today. But this is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about, and a topic that I think really completes what we're trying to do as pre-need professionals. And recently I've been reflecting on an experience that I hadn't given much thought to, you know, as growing up, I guess, but recently it's come to the forefront of my mind. And just to give you a little background, in my family I'm the youngest, and I'm the youngest by a bit of a margin. The next up for me is 6 years older, and the oldest is 15 years older than I am. So the parents that I knew were very different from the parents that my oldest brother knew. He got the young parents, I got the somewhat older parents, and we used to travel all the time, and I was lucky enough that they wouldn't leave me home because I was kind of the runt, and so they'd take me on trips all the time. We got to go see a lot of the U.S. and see other parts of the world. And when you're traveling, you never think about that unexpected happening. It never crossed my mind something happening to me or my parents. You're just focused on having a good time. And when I was about 18, all of that changed. I was living at home. It was a little bit before I went to college, and there was a family in our neighborhood, and their ages were very similar to my parents, and they had been pretty good family friends with my parents, and they had done a lot of service work for their church organization, and that pulled them away from their family. They had a number of children, and during this this time of service, they were, like I said, they had very limited contact, and so their family was eager to spend some time. They wanted to see the grandkids, and so when this church service completed, this couple decided to do a cruise. So they went, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was a tropical location, and so they scheduled this cruise. They had all their children that they were going to go with them, and they set sail on this cruise. And they had an excursion one day where they went out snorkeling as a family. And while they were snorkeling, looking at all the tropical fish, they noticed that Judy, the mother, was not moving. She had become unresponsive in the water. And so obviously, in a frenzy and in a panic, they tried to revive her, tried to get her back to the ship. And at that point, it had been too late, and she passed away while she was on this cruise. And what happened next was, I got all these details secondhand, but it was a nightmare. This family trip that turned into a big family reunion turned into probably one of the worst experiences that they've ever been through. And as the cruise ship was going to its next port, they don't stop for just one person. And so the family had to identify a funeral home, in another country, and take the mother to that funeral home and start the whole process. And what was most painful to me was to hear that their son had to stay aboard the ship to go to the next port so that he could retrieve all her personal belongings. And he had to go pretty much solo while the rest of the family went to this funeral home having just lost their mother. So fast forward through that experience, I remember the first time seeing that man, the woman's husband. It was just a look of exhaustion, and you could tell it had been very emotionally and physically draining on him what he had experienced. Not only did he lose his wife, but he lost his wife out in a different country, and it really rattled the whole family. And that experience just came to mind recently as we're talking about out of very protection. I just wanted to share that with you so that you know that this isn't, while it's not overly common that it happens all the time to people we know, it does happen. Death does occur, and it occurs when we least expect it. And sometimes, unfortunately, we're not at home. To share with you another experience, a woman by the name of Asia Ludwig, this is her picture, and Asia, she was going to have a destination wedding, and she decided to go down to Mexico, and this was in Playa del Carmen, and she was from Utah, and her husband met up down there. They weren't married yet, but that's where they're going to get married. And her father was from Idaho, and his name is Rob Wiscombe. And he was a 43-year-old businessman, and he was a chef from the Pocatello, Idaho area. And so they went down and had their destination wedding, and towards the end, it carried on a little bit into the nighttime, and they don't know exactly what happened, but what they suspect what happened was that after a long night of partying, things might have gotten a little bit out of hand, and the father, Rob, fell over his third-story balcony, and he was found deceased. And so here they were at this destination wedding, and in her words, Asia said, "It was a nightmare. I had the best day of my life, and I woke up to the very worst day." And what happened from there was, instead of going directly to the U.S. consulate, she didn't know exactly what to do. And so what Asia did is she contacted the hotel concierge, and they identified a funeral home in Mexico to work with. And what unfolded from there was really where the nightmare took place. The funeral home that they dealt with was probably not the most honest organization. She said in talking with them, she decided that she really was just going to make the choice to cremate because that was simpler that was the easiest way to get things done. And she said if they had waited to get her father's body back home, it could have taken several weeks. And the way that the funeral home described it was he would be shipped back like luggage. And she didn't like the idea of that. So Asia discussed with the hotel concierge, who then spoke with the funeral home, and they told her first that the cremation would cost $2,000. And then the manager came back, had some discussions after a little bit, and said, you know what, it's actually going to be $4,000, and we're going to need $500 up front. So here Asia is, she just got married, she's with the love of her life, and now she's finding herself in this situation. They scraped together the cash, and she asked the funeral home for a receipt. They refused to provide that, and so they asked the hotel concierge to go witness the transaction because they were pretty much helpless. It wasn't until then that they finally got in touch with the U.S. consulate, who intervened, and the hotel manager was apologetic. And kind of the worst part about this is that Asia, she says at the end that the hotel manager was there, and they were in this hotel, and they bring the ashes, and the person from the funeral home, all he said was there was a problem with the cremation. And she never got any further clarification on what exactly that was. She had no idea. So after all that, they take the ashes home, and she had a foreign death certificate. So she's got a death certificate that's in Spanish while dealing with all the entities here in the United States, Social Security, Veterans Administration, and she was unable to move forward with any of the estate because of the death certificates, and what she needed to have was a documentation of death of an American citizen abroad. So these couple of stories I share with you to understand kind of what the family goes through emotionally, and how common it actually is to occur. I'd like to go through a couple slides on this presentation and share with you what happens when someone dies out of the state, and then follow that up with what exactly happens when someone dies out of the country. I think it's helpful for us to understand what exactly takes place, again, if we've never been through this experience. Now, as I talk through this, I want you to imagine that what we're talking about is your loved one, whether it's your mother or your father. I want you to picture yourself in the shoes of having to deal with this, and really visualize what this entails. So the first thing that happens, let's say that you've got a family member and they're out of state and they pass away. The first thing that needs to take place is you need to notify a funeral home. So imagine you on the other end of this, maybe in a different state. Your family is doing a road trip, or your parents, a death occurs, you get a phone call, and they let you know that your parent has passed away, and now you're challenged with finding a funeral home. Do you go to the white pages? Do you go to the yellow pages? Do you go to Google? How do you identify that funeral home when you've never even been to that location? So let's say that you settle on a funeral home. The next thing that you need to know is if you're dealing with a funeral home that's going to ship the body back, it needs to be a known shipper. And this came about in 2010, that the TSA instituted this known shipper program, and basically the funeral home needs to register with each airline that it would ship with. They can't just do a blanket known shipper with all airlines. So any airline that they're going to work with, they have to have already registered. And in some cases, if it's a small town funeral home, they will outsource this process. So let's say you picked one of those small town funeral homes, and now you're dealing with a funeral home you don't know who's outsourcing your loved one to another company that you don't know and may not fully trust. The funeral home picks up your loved one, brings them into their care, and the next is they have to obtain the cause of death from a medical examiner or coroner, and they need to file a death certificate, which is filed in the state that the death occurred. So now you're on the other end of this, maybe in this waiting period because it could have been an unexpected death, and now you've got your own set of problems to worry about back at home, but now you're thinking, well, do I go back to where my loved one died to help move this process along, what's going on, you're waiting for phone calls from the funeral home, from a doctor, and you've got to get that death certificate. The next thing that needs to be obtained is an out-of-state disposition permit and a release for transit that will allow your loved one to be brought back to where the final disposition will occur. So this funeral home, let's say you're going to transport via air or car. Most commonly, the funeral home is going to embalm the body for transit. And now you're dealing with people that you're never really seeing, you're never really getting to talk to. They're dealing with your loved one. They're performing the embalming. You may not fully trust them. They're getting your loved one or your mother or your father prepared to come back home. Air travel is coordinated. This can be very costly. It can be anywhere in the range of $300 to sometimes over $1,000 just for the flights alone. All of that needs to be coordinated. The family purchases an air tray, which if you've never seen one, it's just a large shipping container that the body is placed in so that it can be shipped, and so they have to purchase that. And then finally, the local funeral home where you live or where home base is receive the remains for services. So all of that has taken place when someone dies out of the state before any services are even held. That is an extremely long and can be a drawn-out process before anything even happens. So not only are you dealing with the emotional costs of what has just taken place and having to coordinate all of that, but you're also dealing with the financial costs, which is oftentimes over $1,000, $1,000, $2,000 when you deal with the two funeral homes expenses, the embalming, the air tray, the airfare. So quite a tedious process. It gets even more difficult when you explore what happens when someone dies out of the country. And I think about this now more than I probably did in the past. My parents, they still like to travel. Unfortunately, I don't get to go with them anymore. But they still do a lot of traveling out of the country. And I want to walk you through this process to just show you how difficult this is for somebody. The first thing that happens is when a death occurs out of the country, again, say it's your family member, you receive notification of the death. The last thing that you're thinking about while your parents are taking a cruise to the Mediterranean or down in the Bahamas is that one of them is going to die, or a family member of yours, a sibling, a child. So getting that notification of the death is probably the last phone call you think you would get from your family at a time like that. And all of a sudden your world becomes disorienting. So you get that phone call, and the next thing that would go through my mind is, what do I do next? Who do I call? So the first thing is you've got to identify a foreign funeral home to work with. Now ideally you would get in touch with the U.S. consulate in that area and work with them throughout the whole process. But unfortunately most people don't know that. And so you're kind of doing this like Asia did through maybe a hotel. You're taking somebody's word for a funeral home, and you don't have many options at that point because you're under a time crunch. So you identify this foreign funeral home, and then they've got to work with the foreign entities to determine the cause of death. And this is a part that kind of scares me, is you're dealing with a funeral home whose standards vary greatly from what we're used to in the United States, and you're also dealing with foreign entities and facilities that are not what we're used to. So they're taking care of your loved one and determining the cause of death. And what happens next is they prepare a U.S. consular mortuary certificate. And this is going to be required if they bring the person back to the United States. It facilitates customs clearance. It's in English. It also confirms information concerning the cause of death. So that needs to be prepared. Next is the foreign death certificate needs to be prepared. And if you remember in that experience that I shared about Asia, it's written in a different language, and that doesn't help a lot when you're dealing with companies that are here in the United States. So you've got to get that death certificate, but there's even more that you'll need if you're really going to be able to settle the estate. The funeral home that you're dealing with is going to embalm and prepare the body for transit. That is if you choose burial. So the funeral home is taking care of your loved one in conditions that are probably, I can't imagine what they're like, maybe less than sanitary in some instances, and they're taking care of your mom or your dad. They're embalming that person, and you never get to see what goes on back there. You just have to take somebody's word for it. Next is they need to coordinate the air travel. And that can be very costly if you're dealing with another country, because there's quite a bit of transportation involved in maybe getting from a cruise ship to an airport and then on an airplane, or just the flight alone to get you back to the United States can be very costly, in the thousands of dollars. It would also need an air tray to get the body back, just the same as you would if you died in the state or in the United States. You need to obtain an affidavit of the foreign funeral director, and this affidavit is prepared by the funeral director saying that the air tray only contains the personal effects of the deceased, and that it contains the human remains of that person. They also need to receive a body transmit permit, which is issued at the point of embarkation, which basically allows the person to be transported. A bill of lading is also required if they're sending your loved one back unaccompanied by itself. So if you've got a family member that takes a trip out of the country on their own, want to be a little adventuresome, then they have to have a bill of lading if that person's going to come back alone that will allow that. This report is also needed, which in Asia's case, Asia Ludwig, I don't think they got until a little while afterwards, is the report of death of an American citizen abroad. And this goes hand in hand with a foreign death certificate to allow somebody to settle the estate. Again, if you don't know what you're looking for, what you need, you may overlook this documentation initially. It's prepared by the consulate in the country that the death occurs, and it's extremely valuable to allow the loved ones to settle the estate and the affairs of the deceased. Then after the transportation has all been settled, all the permits are taken care of, the local funeral home receives the remains for services. So all of that has taken place before you've seen your loved one and before services have been held. And I can't imagine going through this alone, having to deal with this on your own accord. That process is, like Asia said, it seems like a nightmare. And so I want to talk a little bit about why we offer the out-of-area protection, and hopefully you're seeing now that it really is the missing piece of the puzzle, because a lot of times in these plans that we're making, if we don't include out-of-area protection, we're kind of just crossing our fingers that that family is going to experience a death right at home where it's convenient. But as hopefully you're seeing now, that isn't always the case. So I want to talk about why we offer out-of-area protection. And first, it benefits the families that we're serving. Like I said, it is the missing piece of the puzzle. I'd hate to think that there is a family that I served that they wanted to alleviate a burden, and we put together a plan that's going to empower their family to begin healing, and then something happens out of the country or happens out of the state. So that's the first benefit, and that's hopefully pretty obvious now what benefit that is to the families. The second area that it benefits is counselors, and we would kind of we would joke a little bit where I live in Minnesota when I was selling out-of-area protection, but if you haven't sold any of these, the commission on out-of-area protection is very good. You're selling a product of $449, but you're getting a large percentage of commission on that, which if you're doing a single pay policy, that commission can actually exceed the commission on this policy itself. We would joke, my wife and I, we would use the OAP as almost a monetary figure. So when I wanted to upgrade to a new iPhone, I remember I'd tell my wife, I think if I can, that's about 5 OAPs. I need to get 5 OAPs this month. Or we'd go out to dinner and be so, well, That's half an OAP right there. So we would start to measure things in OAP or out of area protection, but it is a huge benefit to you as a counselor. The next is it benefits the funeral homes that we partner with. And I think this is very important for funeral homes to understand. The funeral homes that we work with is we're ensuring that they will receive that call in the future by having a fully funded pre-arrangement. We're also ensuring that the family is not going to be upset with us or the funeral home because they didn't know about this or because we didn't include this as part of their plan. This ensures that that person is going to be brought back to your funeral home and be cared for by people that you know and trust. And finally, it's a huge benefit to Precoa as well. There's some misconceptions that I found about out-of-area protection. And these are the biggest ones that I've seen with people, and I myself was kind of guilty of this. Is the first is if I add out-of-area protection or if I cross that bridge and talk about it, the family won't fund the policy because of the cost. And I just want to assure all of you that that has never happened. I never had that experience where a family did not fund because of the out-of-area protection, and I've never met a single person who said that, yeah, that family, they just didn't fund because the OAP, that 449, just broke the bank. It's never happened. And what we also have done is included a multi-pay option as well with out-of-area protection to even alleviate that even further. I'll tell you what I have done in the past and learned from me is we'll tend to prejudge the family, and we'll say, I don't think this person would need it. I don't think this person would benefit from it. And I did that one time, and I want to share with you what happened. This was when I was selling. I met with a gentleman, and I prejudged him, and I kind of had that feeling like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to approach that one. Everything's good right now, and so if I talk about out-of-area protection, he might not do it. And so I just glossed over it, and I didn't talk about it at all because from my conversation I thought, oh, he doesn't really need it. So we went on, he funded his pre-arrangements, we had a great appointment, and at the end as I'm getting ready to leave, we talked about how much value he saw in what we were doing, and we talked about our plans for the day and the upcoming week, and he said, yeah, I've got this huge road trip that I'm about to take. It's going to be great, and this is going to be a multi-week road trip. And the one thing that I'm thinking is I blew it. I prejudged. I let the worries take over, and what happens if something happens to this gentleman while he's out on this road trip? So don't ever prejudge a family, and don't think that the out-of-area protection will cause them to not fund, because it's just never happened. Another misconception is it's perceived that it will add a great deal of work if we're doing out-of-area protection with a family. And that's another lie, so don't deceive yourself with that one. I can understand if you haven't maybe properly been taught how to include out-of-area protection in a plan. It might be a little bit difficult. You might find yourself, it might be easier to say, oh, I don't know how to include it, so maybe I'll just not do it because it's a great deal of work. The reality is it's simple as including it in our plans, and the form to do it is a single sheet of paper that all it does require you to fill out the people's information and their payment information. So it's very simple once you see it in action. The last thing that I found is some people have said, well, when I'm going through my cash advance items, I can feel like some pressure is mounting as I'm writing more numbers on that cost estimate, and they're added to the plan. And this really was an issue back when we had the out-of-area protection line towards the bottom of our cost estimate cash advance section. What we have done, if you take a look, if you have ordered cost estimates recently, the out-of-area protection line comes in just after flowers and register book on the cash advance items. We do that so that we don't leave it till the end and it's not an afterthought. Because out-of-area protection is something we include in all of our burial and cremation plans, we've moved that line up towards the top to avoid that feeling. So if you're using an old cost estimate and it doesn't have it up higher, I would encourage you to pencil that in on one of the other lines up high on your cost estimate in the cash advance section, so that you don't leave it as an afterthought, almost like, oh, and one last thing, by the way, we don't want it to feel that way. Those are going to be things that will make it more difficult for you. So there are a couple keys to success, and there are really two. The first one is communicate value to the family, and that can be very, very brief, and keep it simple. In everything that we do when we meet with families, we have an unofficial motto, it's no big deal. And out-of-area protection is just the same. It's no big deal. So what I've done is put together a few things that will help you be successful. There's a little bit to do beforehand. Before you go into the home and you sell out-of-area protection, there's two things I would encourage you to do. The first is map out a 75-mile radius on a map around your funeral home or the city in which you sell. You can go to Google, you can find a radius map, and that's going to give you a good visual representation of how far 75 miles is and help you realize how small of a radius that really is. It's very helpful because when you're meeting with families and they tell you, oh, well, I don't travel very much, you don't have to be a big traveler to go outside of 75 miles. So if you know a couple destinations, for example, in Minnesota, one of the destinations is Duluth up north, and that's well outside of a 75-mile radius from where I'm at here in St. Paul. So knowing that, I can help the family know that, 75 miles is not that far. In actuality, if you're going up to Duluth, you're much further than that 75-mile radius. So it helps give you a perspective. The second item on pre-work is gather experiences of families who have had to transfer a body back home. The best way to do this is speak with a funeral director at your funeral home, maybe one that's been there a long time that can share some insight. What I would ask that funeral director, and what I've done, is ask them what the financial costs were, ask them what the emotional costs were for the family, and kind of how the family dealt with it, what their emotions were like. And also, I would just ask them what the process looked like, how long it took. Because those experiences become very personal to your funeral home and to your area. And when you're meeting with somebody, you can share with them those experiences so that they understand, in terms of Minnesota, how much it costs, how much the emotional cost weighed on the family, the timing, everything. So I think it's very good to get a specific feel for your funeral home, what has been the experience overall. So those are the two pre-work items. Go on your computer, map out a 75-mile radius, and the second one is talk to your funeral directors and maybe talk to a funeral home owner and gather some experiences of families who have had to do the body transfer, either within the United States or from out of the country. In the appointment, there's really only 3 areas that will solidify the sale of your out-of-area protection. I don't mean to say it that way to sell the OAP, but that's just the best terminologies. These are the 3 areas where you really solidify it. The first is the chit-chat. The second is cost estimate part A, and the third is your cost estimate part B. And I'll dive into each one of these. And after I do that, I'm going to kind of show you how I fill things in to make it very simple for you. So, with the chit-chat, we're all familiar with the acronym Family, Occupation, Recreation, Message. That's kind of what guides our chit-chat with the family. There's a couple other questions that are important to ask that allow you to dive a little bit deeper into those family, occupation, recreation. A couple of those that I would encourage you to start asking are questions that deal with geographical locations. So, are you originally from the area? That helps you identify, is the family potentially going to visit somewhere that they used to live? Do they have a lot of friends back somewhere else that they might go visit? Ask them where their children are from if they have children. Chances are, if they do love their children, which most people do, I would hope, or grandchildren, find out where they live, because that's probably a location that they would go to visit. Do you get to see your children very often? Follow that question up. Follow the question about where your children live. Follow it up with that question, do you get to see them very often? What you're doing is you're giving yourself a lot of, I like to call it paint, so that you can paint a vivid picture. And the more paint that you get, the more vivid the picture you're going to paint when it comes time to talk about out-of-area protection. And lastly, do you do much vacationing? When you're talking about recreation, find out if they do like to go anywhere or if there is a spot. In Minnesota, we got a lot of people that snowbird down to Arizona, and so that's kind of become one of the questions that we'll include in our chit chat is talk about, do they snowbird or things like that? Do they get away for the winter? These are just questions that it's not at this point that you're going to talk anything about out-of-area protection. All you're doing is just getting some background information so that when the time is right, you can paint a vivid picture. So that's the first section that out-of-area protection is sold. The second section is when we go to the cost estimate part A. I want you to remember this phrase, and it's the first bullet point. It says, in all of our burial and cremation plans, we include out-of-area protection. If you just get that much and you did nothing else, you'll probably be more successful than you are right now if you've been in the habit of offering out-of-area protection. So you'll notice that word in there. It says we include out-of-area protection. Don't offer it to the families. Include it as part of the pre-arrangements. The next thing I'll say, I'll follow that up with talking about how there are unexpected and additional costs if a death occurs away from home base. The third thing I'll do is share with the family a firsthand experience that we've had at our funeral home. Again, this where it's helpful to have already talked to a funeral director and gathered some firsthand experiences so that you can share with them what that's like. And then lastly, tell them the radius. Out-of-area protection covers you if you pass away 75 miles or more away from home. So if I was meeting with a family, I'll just kind of walk you through how I might do this. Say, you know, Mrs. Smith, in all of our burial and cremation plans, we include out-of-area protection. And the reason we do this is to protect you and also your family. You know, a lot of times we put efforts into making a plan and we cross our fingers that we die at home, but in many instances that's not the case. If you were to pass away when you're visiting your children down in Arizona or you're snowbirding down there, so the unexpected happens, there's a lot of not only financial costs but emotional costs in dealing with bringing you back. Also, your family has to deal with all the coordination with another funeral home. They have to deal with the funeral home on this end. And so what out-of-area protection does is if you pass away outside of a 75-mile radius or more, it covers everything to get you back, not only the costs but also the logistics. And then I move forward. So it's as simple as that. And again, like I said, if you merely remember the phrase, in all of our burial and cremation plans we include out-of-area protection, you will be more successful with out-of-area protection. So again, don't offer it. I've seen people that make the biggest mistakes, and the ones that are not successful and get frustrated are the ones who say, they get to the cost estimate part A and they say, next is we have this out-of-area protection. Do you travel much, or do you get out of town very much? And most people are always going to say, not really, or even if they do travel. And then you're in an uphill battle because you ask them at that point, do you travel? Which this isn't a travel plan, it's out-of-area protection plan. And the second point is now you're trying to offer it to somebody and you're trying to sell them. It's a lot easier if you just include it, because that's what we do with all of our burial and cremation plans. The third section, last section, where the out-of-area protection is kind of solidified and sold, is your cost estimate part B. And my only two pieces of advice on this is make sure that you don't include that out-of-area protection or the 449 in your payment option calculations. So when you take your payment calculator and you're figuring out your rates, make sure that that 449 is subtracted out of the total. Otherwise, you're going to submit the application and all your rates are going to be off because you've included this out-of-area protection, and the family will not receive the out-of-area protection, and instead you'll get a call from NGL having to go back to the family. So don't do that. The second point is, on your cost estimate part B, when you're writing out the amounts for your payment options, write out OAP instead of 449 each time. The reason I do that is just so that you're not writing that number out every time so they're looking at it, because we want it to be included as part of everything else. So we just write OAP. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here. I've got a I've got a PDF of a cost estimate Part A. Now, I'll show you how I fill that out. And I've also got a PDF of cost estimate Part B. And I'll walk you through that so you can see what that looks like. First, we'll go to cost estimate Part A. And as you take a look at this, we've got our cost estimate for Jane Doe. And in this side, we have our services and merchandise. You'd fill that out as normal. So let's say her services came out to $4,000 and her merchandise came out to $2,000 for a total of $6,000. When we get to filling out our cash advance items, we'll fill in the death certificates, we'll fill in the obituaries, the flowers, and then we come down to this out-of-area protection line. We're going to say, now the next thing on here, Jane, is our out-of-area protection. And in all of our burial and cremation plans, we include out-of-area protection. And we do this to protect you and your family, because a lot of times what happens is we put this effort into making a plan and we hope that we die at home. But that doesn't always happen. And even here, what we've seen at our funeral home is somebody who passed away as close as Arizona, which you mentioned that you like to snowbird down there, and you also said you like to visit your children in California. What we've seen is those costs can well exceed the cost of the funeral arrangements, but also your family's having to deal with all of that on the worst day of their life. So that's why we include this, and what that does is it protects you if you pass away anywhere 75 miles or more from home, it's covered. And then I write down that number, that 449. So I put it on the cost estimate. Let's say you fill in the rest of yours. I left out any other costs just for ease. When we come down to the bottom, the total cash advance items is totaled at 900. And I'll tell you the rationale why I do this. If you total these items, 500, 300, 100, and 449, they do not come out to 900. They come out to the 900 plus the 449. I put 900 down here because when I'm transposing this cost estimate to a statement of goods and services, I want to eliminate as much as possible any recalculation or any errors on transposing. And so what I do here is I put the total of the cash advance items without that 449 out-of-area protection. I've heard from many other people that that's the easiest way in their mind also to keep it straight and to avoid any errors on your statements. The total goods and services, 6,000 right here, is simply just the goods and services cost. If you add those two together, you'll notice it's 6,900. On the total funeral amount line, I have not written 6,900. I have written 7,349. That's the total of your services, your merchandise, and out-of-area protection. The reason that I do that is any line that has the total cost of what it is today, I want that to look just like it would be if they wrote me a check for everything today. Out-of-area protection is included in that, especially for single-pay families. Make it seamless so it says the total for what the cost would be today. Down in this lower left-hand corner, I always write the face value of the policy, the 6,000 plus the 900. The reason I do that is to remind myself that when I'm doing my payment option calculations, I want to base it off of 6,900. Also, when I transpose this to a statement of goods and services, my total funeral amount is 6,900 and the out-of-area protection is 449. So just to run through that one more time, cash advance items, I do not include the 449 in the total. I do write it on this line, but I don't include it in the total just for ease of transposition. Total goods and services is simply that number right there. Total funeral amount, have that be the services, merchandise, and the out-of-area protection, so it's a bottom line figure. And in the bottom left-hand corner, just take note of what the face value of the policy is so that when you go to cost estimate Part B, you don't screw up your rate calculations. So the next thing I want to show you is how I fill out the cost estimate Part B. And I'll switch over to that right now. So for Jane Doe, say she's 50, again, her total cost, $73.49. That's the total of the policy plus the out-of-area protection. If she wrote me a check today, that's how much she would pay. My future cost estimates, again, those are based off of 6,900. I always just tend to round these. So for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. They're just future projections, and so it's okay to round them. This next part is the part that's a little bit different for payment options. The single pay, you'll notice, is $73.49. Again, any line that tells them what they would pay today as a total, I want that to cover everything. So I write in $73.49. When it comes to these payment options, I will put the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year option, and I'll list them as normal. And out to the side, I'll write plus OAP. And I'll tell the family when I write that down, I'll simply just say, I'm writing plus OAP off to the side, and that simply stands for out of area protection. I don't tell them, oh, and that's going to be an extra $449. I don't approach that subject until the very end when I'm collecting a check. I simply tell them that just stands for out of area protection. And I'll draw an arrow down just to indicate that it's included in each of the 3, 5, 10, and 20. I will continue with the presentation as normal and ask them, based on these figures, which one makes most financial sense. I will let them pick the option that makes most financial sense. Let's say they do a 10-year, $98.90. And then I move forward with filling out the policy application and the statement of goods and services and my Masa form. I fill all of that information out, and the only point at which I request that extra $449 is at the very end when I'm collecting the check for the 10-year option. So we'll finish all the paperwork and we'll say, well, perfect. The only thing we need to get this started is the first month's check for that 10-year, which is $98.90. And I'll say, now in this first month, we also include that out-of-area protection because we want you to be covered from day one. And so this first check is going to be the $98.90 plus the $449 for that out-of-area protection. And then moving forward after this month, your payments drop down to that regular low amount of $98.90. And let them get their checkbook and proceed to do it. That's the best way that I found to approach this. So really, you're not changing anything with the way you lay out your payment options other than writing out plus OAP off to the side. The only part where you kind of approach the subject of getting that extra $449 is right at the very end when you tell them we'll collect that first month's check and we'll also need that out-of-area protection. And it's at that point where if that becomes an issue where the family cannot do that full $449, we do have that last resort payment options for out-of-area protection. That is the best way that I have found to successfully include out-of-area protection in all of our plans. And if you can remember one thing, I'm gonna put a slide up here. If you remember one thing from this training today, I want you to remember this phrase. In all of our burial and cremation plans, we include out-of-area protection. And I say that to every family when it comes to the out-of-area protection line. If you remember that, you'll be more successful than you probably have been in the past, especially if you've taken the mindset of we're offering this. As a final note, I understand that there are some situations such as hospice, somebody who really is bedridden or terminal that really is not going anywhere. They're going to pass away very soon. The practice that I think is to get in the best habit of doing is you may not include that amount for somebody that's in hospice because, again, that's probably not going to apply. But what I do make the habit of is still letting them know that, you know what, Mr. Jones, this may not apply to you because of your health situation, but I wanted you to know that in all of our burial and cremation plans, we do include out-of-area protection, which would probably make a lot more sense for your children or your spouse still. So we still approach it and we still talk about it, but understanding there are some extenuating circumstances. With that said, don't prejudge anybody. You know, I've had people that I did prejudge, and then I found out after the fact that they do travel quite a bit, even though in their mind they don't travel. So you will be successful if you remember that. I want to kick it back over to Eric Battles, and thank you for watching me. I know that's not the most beautiful thing. We probably should have had Eric's face up the whole time. But I'll kick it back over to Eric and for any final thoughts and open up for questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Spencer, so much. We're grateful for your time and your energy and being able to share all of your best practices and your experience with us. I do want to remind everybody we do have a few more minutes as our special guest Ben Wood is going to be sharing some of his experience. To please, if you do have more questions for Spencer regarding the presentation, regarding the process of the close and the paperwork, that type of thing, in terms of the cost estimate B, please write them down in the chat box. We've gotten some great questions already. We want to make sure that we address as many of those as possible with Spencer while we've got him on the line here. So please, in the next couple of minutes, as Ben is sharing his experience, if you're not still viewing this in the web portal, you can again click the YouTube button. It will open up the page in YouTube, and then you'll be able to see the chat box, and you can enter your comments right here. We'll be tracking those and be able to pose those to Spencer in a few minutes. With that, I do want to introduce our special guest. We have Ben Wood from Kansas City here with us. Ben has been able to create some really great practices, have some great experience with out-of-area protection just in the last few months. I'm going to turn the time over to him to kind of share his experience. So thanks so much for being with us this morning, Ben.
Mute.
Hey, Ben, I'm just going to come right in. Ben, can you unmute your microphone real quick for us?
Sorry,
Okay.
I did click, but apparently
that's why I'm here,
up.
Ben. That's okay. That's why I'm here. All right, take it away, Ben.
So I just want to thank you guys for having me today, and I would like to share with you my transformation with out of area. I've been presenting this for about a year now, and previous to this training, on any given month, I was selling probably about 1 to 3 Masa memberships per month. And it wasn't until 4 months ago that I received this very training that you guys just had today. And I was blown away with the simplicity of the message. I set a goal right then and there that I was going to triple my volume. I was going to hit 8 memberships by the end of that month. And I had never done anything like that before. And I really just made one small, simple change to my presentation. In all of our burial and cremation plans, we include out-of-area protection. That small change in my presentation completely changed the entire way that my families view me as a counselor, but also the way that I presented. I became the trusted advisor that I had been working so hard to become. That month, I set a goal of 8, and I ended my month with 16 Masa memberships. I was so excited, and the momentum just kept building, and then in April, I did it again. And last month, I closed with 13. So this has been very exciting for me and my family. My wife and I are currently looking at buying our first home, and the projected mortgage itself, or I should say the commissions that I have received from these Masa memberships have been more than enough to cover our projected mortgage. So that's just been huge and obviously very exciting for us. The one thing that I learned through all of this is that as a counselor, it is my job to help remove the burdens that are so often left for our loved ones. If I truly believe that, then I will want my families to have out-of-area protection plan as part of their pre-arrangement, because that's the thing that's really going to wrap it together and complete their plan and protect their family in the event that something happens away from home. If there were 2 pieces of advice that I would say this: you have to include out-of-area every single time to every single family. And secondly, don't be scared of a little bit of kickback from your families. I was obviously very nervous when I first started doing this. I had the same feelings of doubt. I was just adding up one more cost after another cost. And what I learned is that once you begin to do this and you include it every single time, your families will begin to expect it. And when they do give a little bit of kickback, I just very quickly validate their concerns, reaffirm that this is something that we include, and then again, I become that trusted advisor and move on. And I've noticed that I've stopped receiving any friction from my families. It has just been so easy. I would just encourage all of you to start today. Start including it with every family, and it really is that easy. In all of our burial and cremation plans, we include out-of-area protection. And there's a lot of value in this, and I just want to thank you guys for having me, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. We're grateful for your ability to be with us this morning and for sharing your experience. I think we've had stories and experiences just like Ben's all over the country. I think one of the coolest things about it is it's nothing. There's no secret weapon that's super hard or difficult about this process. It has become about simplifying it more than anything else, and simply by the process of including it instead of offering it. It's been an incredible thing to watch, to see the jump in Ben's production through this process has been cool, and we've seen that across the country with a lot of other agents as well. We're grateful. Thank you so much again, Ben. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time back over to Justin Ashby, who's going to moderate some of our question and answer time with Spencer. So again, if you do have, we'll keep the chat box open, so we'll keep addressing questions as they come in. I know that we have several in here as prepared for us already. So with that, Justin, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Hey, this has been fantastic. Thank you for all your comments and questions. Again, we want to do more of these, so please give us your feedback. Let us know how the quality's been, if you feel like you really are gaining something from these webinars. So, but yeah, moving on, we have some great questions. I'd like to start, Spencer, for you. This one's from Rick Smith. He has a great question. I'll form it like this. Can you explain, Spencer, the different options for how to pay for OAP and what you recommend to keep it simple? I know a lot of people are worried about going through this whole process and then adding one other process with payment options and everything. Could you maybe expound a little bit on that and how to just keep it simple?
Definitely. So the simplicity, I think we kind of touched on, is making sure you include that $449 in every cost estimate and every plan that we do include out of area protection. And hopefully I'm understanding the question right, but the options to pay for that, what I found to be most simple is to do it the exact same payment method that they're paying for their pre-arrangements. And if that's most of the time it's going to be check or electronic funds transfer, you can use a voided check just like the same one that you get for the pre-arrangements. You can take that voided check and fax it with your Masa application. So that, in my opinion, is the easiest. You can also pay for Masa through a credit card. You can do the whole thing on a credit card, and some areas that's been very successful to do. If you would like, you can do we do have payment options. I typically would say leave that as a last resort, because you'll find that most families that do see value, even for multi-pay families, you will have a lot that will actually include that out of area protection. Otherwise, at the very end, we do have the payment options to break that up over a 12-month period. And you can do an early payoff on that. The family can, just as they would with the insurance policy, they can do an early payoff within the first 3 months if they would like to, and it's the same as cash. So what I found to be most simple is I always would do it the exact same method of the pre-arrangement itself. I would do it out of the same checking account, the exact same voided check, and just take that $449 out. I think there may have only been one instance where I did put it on a credit card because the family asked about that option, and so the pre-arrangements were done on a check, EFT, and the other OAP was done on credit card. So I hope that answers your question. I don't have the chat box open, so I can't see if that fulfills it, but I'll send it back to Justin.
Yeah, just to follow, make sure we cover all of Rick's concerns here. He also just mentioned that he was looking for maybe a little bit of help with the close, because it kind of ends up being 3 different checks, and so his concern was just kind of just what I mentioned earlier, keeping it simple. He basically says, I'm asking for a check for policy, and then another check for a state filing fee, and then a third check for OAP. So he's wondering if you might have any insight on just kind of keeping that close simple and fluid.
Great. And so that is my recommendation, is I would just use the exact same check. Now, if you're doing if you're mailing in your application, then this is a little bit different, because you're going to mail in the physical check with your application. But if you're in the habit of faxing in your applications and you're using a voided check, there's no reason why you can't use that exact same voided check for your Masa application. They will accept a faxed voided check along with your application. So that's what I would recommend. As far as the state filing fee, I haven't had to deal with that. But you should be able to just use the exact same check. and that eliminates 3 down to 2. Again, one being for the policy and the Masa and the other state filing fee.
Okay, great. Now we have another question, and I apologize if I get these names wrong. I'm just reading them off of who put the comment. But Time Woods Harris, thanks for all your comments throughout the webinar. She adds a question real quick for you, Spencer. Could you show the sample enrollment form again? Not sure how OAP is noted on that form. Would you have access to that sample enrollment form to show?
I don't have the Masa PDF enrollment form in front of me. I do have a paper version that is right here.
Let's go with that. I'll kick it to you, and maybe you can show us just a little bit there.
Okay. So there is a paper enrollment form which looks like this, and this is one that would be sent directly to Masa, that would be faxed to Masa. There is also another method that you can do it, which is through an enrollment form that would go, instead of going to Masa, it would go to NGL. This one, most people have found that this is the easiest way to do it, is to send this directly to Masa. It gets issued a little bit quicker, and I've just heard kind of overwhelming feedback that this is the way to go. And so right here, it's very straightforward. You've got the information for the member, and if there's a second purchaser, you can put them right on the exact same form as number 2. And then down at the bottom, it's got your payment options. It's got either your check. You can fill in the actual checking information. So let's say they don't give you a voided check, and they do their prearrangements through a payment authorization. You can do this, fill this out just like you would the payment authorization. It's all the exact same information. You put it there. Otherwise, you can include a voided check with the application. So you don't need to go through and fill all that out if the family authorizes a voided check. And then you get your signatures down at the bottom. This plus the payment would then be faxed over to Masa. And it's got the number at the very top. You can submit by fax right there. So you'll send your policy application to National Guardian Life, and then you'll send this to Masa. That's going to be your quickest and easiest way to do it. So this is the enrollment form. The only time this comes into play is when you're filling out your paperwork at the end of the appointment. Fill out your application, fill out your statement. If you've got an irrevocable form, fill that out, and fill out your Masa form. Very simple, very straightforward. Not a lot of writing to do on this.
Okay, excellent. Then I think just to make sure we cover all of Time's questions, could you also show just on the cost estimate A and B exactly where that comes up? You can do the OAP offer there.
Yep. So show on the cost estimate part A and B, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. So let's take a look at cost estimate part A. So up here, you'll notice the out-of-area protection line. Right there, I will write in the 449 number. Down below, again, I do not include it. This is preference, and I found a lot of people to prefer doing it this way because it eliminates errors. To not include it in your total cash advance items. Total your cash advance items and leave out the out-of-area protection, so that when you're in a fury transposing all that information from your cost estimate to your statement, you don't accidentally include it. Total goods and services, again, that's $6,000. The total funeral amount, I put $73.49, which is this number, the cash advance, plus your services and merchandise, plus the out-of-area protection. I do that so that when I turn the cost estimate towards them and show them kind of the bottom line figure, $73.49. Essentially, if you wrote me a check today, this is how much you would pay, $73.49. And then in the lower left-hand corner, I make a note for myself that the actual policy face value is not $73.49, but is in fact $6,900, which is $73.49 minus $449, the cost of the OAP. So then when I move to making my payment calculations, I simply use this number so that I don't screw things up with the policy. So that's how I do cost estimate part A. I'll show it one more time. And I think Eric can send these out. We've got the out-of-area protection, $449. I don't include it on the cash advance total. It's not obviously not included there, but I do include it in the very bottom's total funeral amount. Down here, I make a note of the face value of the policy just to keep things straight in my mind. And then I'll show you cost estimate part B. So here's cost estimate part B. Age, name, age, today's cost, again, $73.49. If you wrote me a check for everything in a single pay, this is how much your check would be. Future cost estimates, again, nothing new there. And then when we come to the payment options, single pay, again, you write me a check today, it's going to be for $73.49. That's the policy face value plus out-of-area protection. And then when I write in my 3, 5, 10, and 20, I will write in the figures and write plus OAP off to the side. I avoid writing $449 just because when the family sees that number there, I don't want them to think that they're going to have to pay that $449 every month. It's just a lot easier to write OAP. It doesn't cause any confusion as long as you say, I'm just writing that off to the side because it stands for your out-of-area protection. And then, and only then when I collect the check do I let them know that before they issue the check, I'll say this first payment is going to be that monthly amount, let's say $98.90 for the 10-year. This first check we do include the out-of-area protection of $449 because we want you to be covered from day one on with out-of-area protection, and so that's why we have that one up front. And then I let them know, and then after this first month, it's going to drop right down to that $98.90 per month. So these are in PDF. I think Eric can send some of these out just to see how I fill those in. And hopefully that answers the question for you.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, the only other thing, just to make sure we have that all wrapped up, is regarding the actual NGL insurance application. Do you need to notate OAP anywhere on that to make sure the transaction goes smoothly?
So let me see if I've got a form right next to me really quick. This may be...
That form, we're going to be wrapping this up very soon, so if there's any other questions, thank you so much. We actually had a pretty large amount of live viewers, so for those of you that are still watching, which is still quite a few, if you have any other questions for Spencer, we also have Ben still online with us, and Eric Battles, obviously, so if you have another question, please put that right now in the comment section on YouTube, and we'll get that question answered quickly. So I'll go right back to Spencer.
Sure. So as last that I understood, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but NGL does like to know if the policy has Masa attached to it. This form right here, the out-of-area protection plan, it is a box that you can check that lets NGL know that if the payment mode is different than the pre-need policy, or if it's the same as the pre-need policy, you can check either one of those boxes and you can send this to NGL. Now, I'm not positive if they've changed that wanting to have one of these in every application or not. Does Eric have any insight onto that, or Ben, maybe you can share your best practice on that, either one of you? Okay. They're giving me the thumbs up. So you can indicate on your NGL application, just because NGL does like to track that, if the policy does have a Masa membership attached to it. So you can send this in. If you neglect to, I don't think that's going to cause an issue or a headache. Ben, has that been your experience? Can I just have Ben chime in on that?
Yeah, you sure can. I'm not really sure what the best way to do that is. I've actually, and maybe I need to make a change on this now, but I actually stopped filling that form out, and I don't know if that's a good change or not. And I sent it directly to Masa now. I see Eric Battle's face down there. I don't know if they have to have that, but I found that I've had a lot more of mine actually get processed by sending it directly to Masa rather than sending it to National Guardian Life. Is that something that I should really be doing? I don't know if that, can I mean, do I need to make that change right now?
All right, so this is what I would do, is I would fax this to Masa just because that's the quickest way, and I would indicate with your NGL policy that they do have a Masa membership included. Just because NGL does like to have that. Like I said, it's if you don't send that over to NGL, it's not like your policy or your Masa is not going to get processed. But for everything to be neat and tidy, and for us to be able to track these things, and also for the family's sake, if they call NGL wanting to know, NGL knows it's one more layer of protection for the family that we do have a Masa for your mother or father. And so that's where this form, you don't need to fill anything out on this one, just let NGL know that you have submitted a Masa for that family.
Okay, well, looking at the questions, it looks like there's you know, we've pretty much wrapped up. If you notice, Kate Batten, she's one of our employees here at the home office. She's been answering a lot of these clerical or documentation type questions. So if you have any other questions like that, seek out your RC or also Eric Battles, and we can get a hold of the right people to answer those questions. Kate's been a huge addition to the OAP team, and she's been doing a great job keeping all that straight. So we'll make sure she gets those answers. The last question is just from time, which I can answer. Yes, we are working on some more media, some more content regarding OAP that counselors can use, so that will be coming in the future. As regard to details on exactly what type of those things will be, we're kind of still figuring out the very best way to offer additional resources to all our field agents. So just stay tuned, and thanks everyone for watching this live webinar. I'll kick it back to Eric Battles just to wrap us up, but I really appreciate everyone that signed on. We've had great viewership, and hopefully we can get some feedback as to the viewing experience that everyone has had. But Eric Battles, I'll hand it back to you, and you can take us home. All right, we know one thing to work on. We need to work on this mute button. All right, let's get. Okay, he's back on. Here we go.
Sorry about that. We are grateful. Thank you again for everybody who's been attending live. We're grateful for your questions, for your comments. The cool thing is a lot of you answered each other's questions with comments as well, so we're grateful for the expertise that currently exists out there. Thank you, Spencer and Ben, for being with us, for your time. I know it's precious this morning. We're grateful to be able to share these best practices and these experiences across the country. One quick thing I want to mention before we wrap up is we do have basically everything that Spencer has covered today, along with video training of him role-playing through the process of presenting OAP in the paperwork on cost estimate A and cost estimate B on the Academy. I'm going to flip over to share my screen. As you can see, this is on the Academy. As you go into the Academy and work your way through to the out of area protection section, and then the presentation part of out of area protection, you can scroll down through here. You'll get down to the approach. So we cover each of the elements that Spencer covered there, along with the exact scripting that has been found to be most successful. So you can see here in the chit chat, as we move then to cost estimate part A, as you see off to the right-hand side, there are a number of different pieces over here that you can zoom in on. This is the actual Masa brochure that I would encourage you to kind of slip into Final Wishes organizers so that a family has it with them that you leave behind. As we move down into cost estimate part A, you can see the scripting that Spencer utilizes, along with the video of Spencer actually presenting this exact portion of it. Then we move down to cost estimate part B, the video of him totaling it up there. Also off to the right-hand side, as Spencer mentioned, the PDFs of the sample cost estimate part A and cost estimate part B that he shared with you can be downloaded right here by clicking on this button. You can click it, download it to your computer, print it off, and have it as kind of a cheat sheet for you. Then as you see down here through the close and the video as well, totaling them up. So then you've got the cost estimate part B example as well. So please utilize this. We additionally then have the rest of the paperwork training. All of your field managers and regional consultants have been trained on all of this. Please reach out and schedule some time for them to sit down with you to walk through. If you haven't been selling out of area protection, we really want you to have the opportunity to do so. So please get with your RCs. If you just haven't been doing it that much, please take advantage of the training that we've offered here. Basically, as I mentioned, everything that Spencer has offered here is on the Academy. So please take advantage of the resources that we have. Now, with that, I just want to thank everybody that's been a part of this, Spencer and Ben. We really believe that out-of-area protection is sort of the final piece, something that really allows us to fully protect these pre-need plans. As Spencer mentioned, oftentimes we go into the process of pre-planning with the best of intentions, and we oftentimes plan the best case scenario. We might not consider that services might need to take place on a weekend, and that costs more. We might not consider that the majority of people actually don't necessarily pass away at home or in their hospital bed. And so as we can be more considerate about all of the opportunities, we really believe that out-of-area protection, if we're going to work this hard to be able to create an intentional plan to help people's families begin healing at the time of their loss, we really want to make sure that that intentional plan goes smoothly no matter where or when they pass away. So we're grateful for the opportunity to be here with you. Additionally, we're going to be rolling out more webinar trainings and live trainings like this across the country on different topics throughout the presentation and different elements of the job. Please give us some feedback. Please share with us your thoughts. We're excited to continue to do this. We want to do more of it. We want to know what's going to be best and most helpful to each of you. So please contact us. Contact myself, Eric Battles, ebattles@precoa.com, or Peyton Thompson in Sales Development, pthompson@precoa.com. Give us your feedback. We're excited. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for those that did not attend live but are going to take the opportunity to view it later. We're grateful for everything you do. Have a great day and have a great rest of your week. So long.